The world was shaking under the weight of its own choices. Every day, the headlines brought new threats, new horrors, new evidence of an increasingly uncertain future. The invasion of Ukraine had triggered an escalation of global tension that showed no signs of abating. The military powers were testing their limits, expanding their nuclear arsenal and flirting dangerously with total conflict. Amid the inflammatory rhetoric of world leaders, a new weapon was gaining ground. Artificial intelligence applied to the battlefield. Automated systems decided on targets. Drones acted without human supervision, and algorithms determined the fate of entire cities. War was becoming a cold equation, devoid of morality or compassion. At the same time, the planet was suffering. Droughts were turning once productive regions into infertile deserts. Fires devoured ancient forests, while violent storms destroyed coastal cities. Ice was melting at the poles, raising ocean levels and threatening millions of lives. The Doomsday clock ticked 8 minutes to midnight, a terrifying symbol of how close the world was to irreversible catastrophe. Protesters marched in the streets demanding change, but were silenced by a system that was only accelerating its own destruction. Hope became an increasingly abstract concept, suffocated by the weight of imminent collapse. Then something happened. At first, it was just a glow in the sky, mistaken for a meteor passing through the atmosphere. But the light intensified, fragmenting into dozens of beams that slowly descended over the great capitals of the world. Transmissions were interrupted. Satellites stopped responding, and a sepulchral silence dominated the planet. Colossal ships hovered over the cities, their imposing presence turning skyscrapers into mere details in the landscape. They were impossibly vast structures, geometric blocks that defied human comprehension. They had not been detected before their arrival. They were simply there. A pulse of light emerged from the center of each ship, and then the message was transmitted, not by words, but by thought, invading everyone's consciousness at the same time. Humanity was on trial. The visitors had not come to save, but to decide whether the species deserved to continue existing. The verdict, however, seemed predetermined. "You've had enough time," the message echoed in every mind. "Your actions speak louder than your promises." The silence broke with a wave of chaos. People ran in desperation. Governments tried to re-establish communications, and leaders entered frantic meetings in the hope of negotiating a surrender. But there were no demands, just a sentence: humanity had failed. The first actions were surgical. Military bases were deactivated, defense systems neutralized without firing a single shot. Entire fleets disappeared under energy beams that simply erased their record of reality. The world, which had previously been preoccupied with its own disputes, now faced an unbeatable force, a presence that saw human beings as something irrelevant, expendable. And, for the first time, everyone was on the same side. But would that be enough? The countdown had begun and midnight was approaching. Humanity was facing its own doom. Chaos was spreading through the streets, fueled by the despair of billions of people who saw the end approaching. The world, once divided by borders and interests, was unified in fear. Without distinction of nation, creed, or color, everyone was the target of unquestionable judgment. The ships hovered in the skies, silently watching, like gods deciding the fate of a civilization that didn't know how to take care of itself. While governments tried in vain to negotiate a surrender, the first targeted attacks took place. Military infrastructures were eradicated in a matter of seconds. Nuclear facilities were decommissioned, their warheads reduced to mere inert casings. Defense systems, once thought to be invincible, fell one by one without the slightest resistance. For the invaders, the destruction of humanity was not a war, but a logical and inevitable process. But amid the despair, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. Small groups of scientists and activists were organizing. They knew that weapons were not the answer. If there was a chance of survival, it lay in understanding, in redemption. The world didn't need more war. It needed to prove that there was still something worth saving. And to do that, they would have to defy the judgment that had been imposed on them. Resistance was emerging from the ashes of hopelessness. Small sparks of hope were emerging among scientists, activists and visionaries who believed that humanity could still be saved. But redemption would require a sacrifice, and perhaps a price that few were willing to pay. In underground laboratories, sheltered from the watchful eye of alien ships, brilliant minds worked tirelessly to understand the visitors and their motivations. The problem was not technology but morality. The enemy was not an entity to be defeated, but a collective conscience that had decided, based on irrefutable evidence, that humans had lost their right to exist. While the great powers insisted on seeking a method of retaliation, a small group of researchers found a different path. They believed that there was still a way to communicate with the aliens, to present a defense for humanity. Time was short, and every second wasted could mean the end. Transmissions were established. In various parts of the world, scientists began to send signals, not of defiance, but of regret. They showed images of the destruction caused by humans themselves, but also of hopes for a better future. They showed children, forests being reborn, communities rebuilding what they had previously destroyed. They begged for more time, for a chance to prove that they could change. The invaders didn't respond immediately. The silence was terrifying. But then, for the first time since their arrival, they changed position. The previously static ships began to move, as if considering the information they had received. Humanity was not yet saved, but a new chapter in this silent war had begun, and the price of survival could be even higher than imagined. The world held its breath as the alien ships moved, their silent dance in the skies reflecting a trial that was still underway. As humanity struggled to present a convincing defense, the visitor signals became more frequent. What was once a definitive sentence now seemed like a deeper evaluation, an investigation into the possibility of redemption. However, not everyone was willing to wait passively. Military factions, fearful rulers and scientists who refused to trust in alien mercy initiated a desperate response. In a simultaneous attack, missiles were launched at the ships, setting off colossal explosions in the night sky. The cities below vibrated with the shockwave, while millions watched between horror and hope to see if humanity had found a way to fight back. But the response was relentless. Without any previous display of aggression, the visitors struck back with incomprehensible power. Beams of energy swept through the military bases from which the attacks had come, reducing them to smoking craters in a matter of seconds. The remaining nuclear artifacts were disarmed remotely, dismantled before they could even be used. Chaos ensued. Demonstrators crowded the streets demanding unconditional surrender, while others called for more resistance. The world was divided between those who believed in the possibility of redemption and those who feared that humanity's fate was already sealed. In the midst of all this, the leaders of the groups trying to negotiate salvation understood the harsh reality. The Earth was on the brink. The slightest mistake could mean the definitive end. Now only one last attempt remained. The time for words was running out, and hope depended on a single gesture, definitive proof that humanity could change. But what would that gesture be? And, above all, would it be enough to convince those who had come to exterminate them? The world was about to fall apart. The military's rash attack had almost sealed humanity's fate, and the alien ships loomed in the sky, imposing and unshakable. Time was running out. Realizing that they were facing their last chance, the scientists and activists who had been trying a peaceful approach decided to act desperately. A broadcast was sent out globally, not just to the visitors but to every corner of the planet. Instead of justifications or pleas, the message showed humanity in its essence. The love of a mother for her child, divided peoples coming together to rebuild after disasters, children learning about the world with eyes shining with curiosity. It didn't hide the mistakes of the species, but highlighted its capacity to learn, evolve and seek a greater purpose. It was a simple and raw attempt to expose something that numbers and statistics couldn't measure: the human soul. The ships ceased all activity for endless hours. Panic began to give way to silent waiting. Then, without warning, the beams of light that connected the ships to the ground disappeared. One last message echoed in the minds of every human being. You have failed countless times, but you have also shown that you can change. Destruction is final, but hope is infinite. Use this opportunity wisely. And so, one by one, the immense structures began to rise beyond the atmosphere. The colossal shadows that covered the cities were dispelled by the morning light. Humanity had not won, but it had been given a second chance. A chance to prove that it could do things differently. The doomsday clock was set. It was still a few minutes before midnight, but for the first time in decades, the hand had moved even the slightest bit away from the abyss. The question remained, what would they do with this new opportunity? Would it be enough to reverse centuries of mistakes, or just an inevitable postponement of the end? The fate of the world, for the first time in a long time, was entirely in the hands of humanity itself. Now the question remains for you. If tomorrow were the last day on Earth, how would you choose to live it? Time is still ticking, but midnight doesn't wait. If this story made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and help spread the word. The unknown still has a lot to teach us.